And it is true I was asked to stand in as ranking member here, replace Senator Grassley on Monday. So I need to first state that the opinions I express are those of my own, not Senator Grassley. I don't want to get him in trouble. Also want to say I'm not a climate change denier. I'm just not a climate change alarmist. But I find the debate fascinating. I look forward to the hearing. Read a fair amount about it, a couple good books, Climate Change, the Facts, edited by Alan Moran. Apocalypse Never is a more recent one by subtitle there, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All by Michael Schellenberger. And then anything that Bjorn Lomborg writes. And by the way, I think I'm stating this right, that Mr. Lomborg completely acknowledges man-made climate change, just doesn't think we should spend anything with limited resources. There's far better ways of spending money to alleviate human suffering. And I'm glad to see that Mr. Lewis is citing Mr. Lomborg in his testimony a number of times. But in my mind, a good scientist is a very healthy skeptic. You know, always questioning, always seeking the truth. And to me, the term scientific consensus, I know there certainly is some, but it's a very unscientific terms in many ways. You know, particularly when we're dealing with something that, I think there's a lot of legitimate disagreement in terms of climate change. But why am I skeptical? I'm 67 years old. I've lived through decades of Malthusianism, doomsayers. And I just asked my staff to get just a couple of the most delicious predictions. Not only were these individuals wrong, they were spectacularly wrong. In 1970, Harvard biologist George Wald estimated that, quote, civilization will end within 15 or 30 years by 1985 to 2000 unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. January 1970, Life magazine said scientists had solid evidence to support the prediction that by 1980, urban dwellers would have to wear gas masks to survive air pollution. In the spring of 1970, issue of The Living Wilderness, Dennis Hayes, the chief organizer for Earth Day, declared that, quote, it is already too late to avoid mass starvation. 1978, the New York Times reported that a team of climate specialists saw, quote, no end in sight to a 30-year cooling trend in the northern hemisphere. 1980, ecologist Kenneth Watt predicted the world would be 4 degrees colder in 1990 and 11 degrees colder in the year 2000. That, by the way, didn't happen. 1988, Maldives Director of Environmental Affairs predicted the rising sea levels threatened to cover the islands in the next 30 years. 1989, Noel Brown, a UN environmental official, said entire nations would be wiped off the earth if sea levels from global warming were not reversed by the year 2000. 2004, a Pentagon climate change report said Britain will be Siberia by the year 2020. Don't think that happened. 2007, head of the UN climate panel claimed that it would be, quote, too late unless drastic action were taken by the year 2012. And in 2008, Al Gore, by the way, anybody know how much his wealth has grown off of climate alarmism? But he cited a claim from another climate researcher that the North Pole may be ice-free by the year 2013. That didn't happen either. So you combine those spectacularly wrong predictions, time and time again, they're never held to account. Nobody ever fact-checks them. But you also just take a look at some data, some scientific data, like the Vostok ice core sample. More than 400,000 years of geologic history, 22.7 degree variation in 4 to 5 cycles. The Greenland ice core sample, 6.7 degrees variation. This is one out of spring and crowds. You know how much the sea level has risen in the Bay of San Francisco since the last glaciation period? 390 feet. So again, real or not, man-made climate change, I don't see how mankind can make even a negligible impact on changing the climate, which always changes. It always does. So I'm concerned that the cure is worse than the disease, that we will be wasting limited resources, mortgaging our kids' future, particularly when China and India are not exactly on board and they're going to continue to provide power to pull their populations out of poverty. What this committee should be focusing on is $31.5 trillion worth of debt, a baseline budget that's gone from about $4.5 trillion prior to COVID to appears about $6 trillion, and nobody's even blinking an eye that we've increased that by a step function about $1.5 trillion. The fact that our interest rates are rising, and with every 1% increase in interest rates, our interest expense will rise by $315 billion. If we just return to the interest rate we paid in the last 3 decades of the last century, that would add $1.2 trillion in interest expense to our annual budget. That's about what we spend on Social Security. So, Mr. Chairman, again, I look forward to the hearing. I think it'll be interesting. I got a lot of questions, but I really think the Budget Committee ought to be focusing on the budget and focusing on that calamity that is roaring toward us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Johnson.